Shalom and welcome back. Today we continue our study of the book of Exodus and of the Sinai covenant. Last time we saw how God delivered his people Israel from Egyptian slavery. We saw how he struck the Egyptians with the 10 plagues, concluding with the plague of the Passover and slaying of the firstborn. This initiated the Exodus and the departure of Israel from Egypt. We saw how God guided the Israelites with the pillar of cloud and pillar of fire, how he led them through the Red Sea, sustained them with the manna, the bread from heaven, on their journeys, and finally guided them to Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, God made a covenant with the people of Israel, and this covenant was considered to be a great betrothal where God as bridegroom came to meet Israel, his bride. With this covenant, God also adopted Israel as his treasured possession and firstborn son. He made them a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, and basically restored his presence on earth, the presence that had been lost since the Garden of Eden. We also talked about how the covenant of Mount Sinai is a type of completion of the new creation of Israel that had begun at the beginning of the book of Exodus, as the children of Israel were being fruitful and multiplying. This new creation is basically concluded at Mount Sinai with God coming to dwell with his people. And so an event of momentous significance as God adopts Israel as his chosen nation. Now, as we continue, we made our way through chapter 24 of Exodus, and we saw how Sinai was the point of meeting between God and his people. But this posed a challenge. Israel could not remain at Mount Sinai forever. They had to depart and go on their way towards the Promised Land. So how would God remain with them? And this is where the tabernacle comes into play. As we're going to see here beginning in chapter 25, this is where God begins to instruct the Israelites to build this place of worship and this sanctuary where he will dwell with and among his people. Now, this place in the book of Exodus, beginning with chapter 25, is very often the place where all these well-meaning people who set out to read the Bible in a year, they get through the book of Genesis, no problem, very interesting story. The beginning of the book of Exodus, no problem. But once they get to Exodus 25, this is often when they begin to tune out. Because what do we see here? A bunch of detailed descriptions of boards and planks and sockets and curtains and arcs and lavers and all these various instruments and furnishings that, to be honest, don't make for the most exciting reading. But we know that if there are so many chapters dedicated to the instructions and building of the tabernacle in the book of Exodus, it probably is quite important for the continuation of the narrative, and especially because we know that this points to how Israel will meet God and how Israel will worship God in the wilderness and for much of the rest of their biblical history. So this is why this second part of our study on the book of Exodus is focused on the tabernacle in the wilderness. At the beginning of chapter 25, we are told that instructions will follow regarding the construction of the tabernacle, and this begins with offerings. All the people make a free will offering because their place of worship is basically going to be financed by their own contributions. And this is the plan for the following chapters. And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst, according to all that I show you concerning the pattern of the tabernacle and of all its furniture, so you shall make it. The Israelites are not allowed to just build any place of worship. They're not given a mandate to just start your own church, so to speak. We know that the instructions will be very precise and very detailed. Why? Because the tabernacle on earth will reflect the sanctuary in heaven. In other words, the way by which Israelites are supposed to approach God here in the wilderness is going to reflect God's very nature in heaven and how we approach God in heaven. And that's why all these instructions, these very detailed instructions, even if they make for tedious readings, are probably very important. So what do we read about in this chapter 25? We're told about this Ark of the Covenant, an ark of acacia wood covered with gold, with on top of it a mercy seat, or otherwise known as atonement cover, and 2 cherubim, these winged angels that remind us of something, don't they? When did we last see cherubim? In the Garden of Eden. That's right, the two cherubim that guarded the entrance of the Garden of Eden. We're told that they are to build a table where they will place the so-called bread of the presence, or showbread, 12 loaves representing the 12 tribes of Israel. They are also to build a menorah or lampstand that will be lit continually. And then we're given details about the construction of the sanctuary itself, or the tabernacle, including the various bars and curtains and what is going to cover this tent. We're told about the altar, the courtyard surrounding the tabernacle, and the gate by which people will enter it. They are to prepare oil for the menorah or for the lampstand that will burn continually. And then in chapter 28, we are given a lengthy description of the garments of the high priest. These very beautiful blue and purple garments that the high priest will wear whenever he is ministering in the tabernacle. Chapter 29 is about the consecration of the priests and the daily burnt offering. Every day the Israelites will have to offer a lamb in the morning, a lamb in the evening, every day to symbolize and to represent their communion with God. And so blood will have to be shed in this place of worship every day to signify God's closeness to them. In chapter 30, we are told they are to build an altar of incense, a laver for the washing of the hands and feet of the priest. They are to prepare anointing oil and also incense that will be brought into the sanctuary. All these are just the instructions for the building of the tabernacle, conclude with the mention of the architects of this construction project. They are called Bezalel and Oholiab, and all this concludes with a mention of the Sabbath. Remember that the Sabbath is a sanctuary in time. It's the moment when Israel will meet God, especially on the seventh day, and by no coincidence, it is juxtaposed with the sanctuary in space. So the place where Israel will meet God comes together with the time when Israel will especially meet God in chapter 31. Unfortunately, as they prepare for the dwelling of God among them, things don't go quite as well as they should. Chapter 32 is the infamous incident of the golden calf. We know that Moses is still on the mountain with God, where he is presumably receiving all these instructions. And during that time, the people ask Aaron, "Come, make us gods that shall go before us." Without much resistance, Aaron goes along with their request. From their gold jewelry, Aaron fashions an idol in the shape of a calf. What's the meaning of this calf? Well, it represents Israel's betrayal of God and their return to the idols of Egypt. Look at what they say in Exodus 32, verse 4. "These are your gods, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt." Not only they build an idol, but they give credit to this idol as the idol being responsible for taking them out of Egypt. What a betrayal of the covenant as soon as it has been formed. In fact, the later rabbis depict this apostasy of Israel as Israel committing adultery while the wedding ceremony is still going on. Last time we talked about how the Sinai covenant was a betrothal between God and Israel, and now as this ceremony is still going on, Israel turns around and goes and commits adultery while the wedding is still happening. God, of course, is not pleased with this, and he intends to destroy the whole people and to make a new nation from Moses, as he himself tells Moses. Moses is not okay with that solution, and so he intercedes for the people, appealing to God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Note here how this covenant with the patriarchs is essential, and on this basis, God will, quote-unquote, succeed in persuading God to not annihilate the people of Israel because of his promises to the patriarchs. So because of Moses' prayer, God relents from destroying them. Nevertheless, Moses is not pleased either. As he comes down from the mountain, he smashes the stone tablets against the foot of the mountain. He burns the golden calf, grounds it into powder, scatters it upon the water, and somehow manages to make all the people drink it. So there's great commotion in the camp, and only the tribe of Levi, the Levites, take Moses' side, and this leads to great bloodshed. The Levites slay some 3,000 men on that day. So the apostasy of the golden calf leads to great massacre in the Israelite camp. And this is going to lead to lasting consequences. The first one is not entirely clear here in the book of Exodus, but it does become quite clear and explicit in the book of Numbers. There we are told that because of the sin of the golden calf, the Levites, thanks to their faithfulness to Moses and to God, are going to replace the firstborn sons. Recall we said last time that the firstborn sons were the original priests of the people of Israel. Well, now, because they did not step up to their task, they will be deposed, basically, and replaced by the Levites, so that the Levites will now form the priestly tribe. Secondly, according to some rabbis, including the great medieval commentator Rashi, the tabernacle was not intended from the very beginning, but the tabernacle was a type of response to the sin of the golden calf. In other words, had Israel not sinned, God would have just remained with his people, dwelling over the camp just as he was with Israel when they left Egypt. But now, because of the sin of the golden calf, they're going to need more mediation and a more complex system of worship that will keep God among them, but somehow separate and distant from them, with many layers of sanctity and ritual that will become necessary for them to approach God. Also, a third consequence of the sin of the golden calf is that there will follow many new commandments, namely everything that follows in the book of Exodus, the entire book of Leviticus, and a good part of the book of Numbers as well, not to mention the entire book of Deuteronomy that in some ways is the covenant of the second generation of the Israelites in the wilderness. So many consequences that will be lasting for the people of Israel. In the meantime, we are in Exodus chapter 33. We are told that the angel will stand between God and the people. And so there is now a relationship that is much more tense between God and his newly formed people. There is a tent of meeting at this point, but it's outside the camp. It seems to be Moses' own private tent. So Moses is Israel's mediator who speaks to God face to face, but he is not together with the whole people. He has his own personal place of meeting with the Lord, which is for now called the tent of meeting. Moses continues to intercede, and this is when the Lord reveals his glory to Moses, not in the fullness of his glory, but the text says the Lord agreed to show Moses his back, and in that way Moses had some glimpse of the glory of the Lord, though not the fullness of his glory. In chapter 34, the Lord renews his covenant with Israel. He's going to give Moses new tablets of stone, and here God reveals his so-called 13 attributes of mercy, a beautiful text that reveals how God is always willing to forgive and to start anew with his people. And it goes like this: the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abounding in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, and the children's children to the third and the fourth generation. So though this passage does speak of consequences to people's sins, in fact intergenerational consequences, still the heart of the passage speaks to the Lord's mercy, grace, long-suffering, and abundance of goodness and truth as he reveals his mercy to thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin. In this chapter 34, as we said, the covenant will be renewed, and God reveals 10 new words to Moses and to Israel. Some commandments are given that are different, but ultimately we are told that Moses remains another 40 days on Mount Sinai, and he writes the 10 commandments on new tablets of stone. As he comes down, the people can see the glory of the Lord on the face of Moses. So the Lord reveals his grace and his kindness and his forgiveness by renewing the covenant with Israel despite their failure and apostasy of the golden calf. As we come to chapter 35, we are already near the end of the book of Exodus, and here we see a repetition for the most part of all the many tedious instructions that we saw in chapters 25 to 31. So here the Israelites now build the tabernacle according to God's instructions. In chapter 40, we are told that they set up the tabernacle and the glory of the Lord comes and fills the holy place. This is going to be the place where God dwells and where he meets his people, as we saw in Exodus 29. And there I will meet with the children of Israel, and the tabernacle shall be sanctified by my glory. Nevertheless, there is no direct access to the Lord's presence in the Holy of Holies. As we are going to see, the tabernacle will be highly regulated by sacrificial worship and by the ministry of the priests. So priests and Levites must mediate between God and the people through liturgy and sacrifices. Once again, this is a very important lesson to teach us how God desires that we approach him. If we look at the tabernacle and its court a little more closely, you can see on this picture that it is in fact quite a messy place. We have the altar with fire burning on top of the altar. We're going to have a lot of animals that are slaughtered every day, a lot of blood flowing, probably not smelling too good. And so this is telling on how God desires to be approached at the time of the Exodus. So what do we see in the tabernacle court? Here is a good illustration. As people walked here through the front gate, the first thing they saw was this altar of burnt offerings. So we begin entering God's presence through altar and sacrifice. The first thing visible in the tabernacle court was the large brazen altar where the animal sacrifices were offered. And so sacrifices every day, a lamb in the morning, a lamb in the evening, in addition to many private sacrifices. And as we're going to see next time when we study Leviticus, sin offerings, guilt offerings, whole burnt offerings, peace offerings, a bloody ritual constantly every day, in addition to also public sacrifices that were offered on the Sabbaths and festivals. Behind the altar was the laver, a great bowl or basin of polished brass containing water for the washing of the priests. So priests needed to remain pure, ritually pure and clean, and so they had to make use of this laver constantly to wash their hands and feet. As we come to the sanctuary, we see that it was divided into two rooms separated by a veil. We had about 2/3 of it, which was the holy place, and the innermost third of it was the Holy of Holies. Here's a great illustration. So you can see the entrance. There is the holy place. Here you can see on the south side the menorah or lampstand, the table of showbread on the north side, and here in the middle, the altar of incense, which represented the prayers of the people going up to God. Then behind this curtain, we had the Holy of Holies and the Ark of the Covenant with the two cherubim over the Ark. And here, only the high priest could come in the Holy of Holies once a year on the Day of Atonement. So here we have it in the holy place. It contained the golden menorah or lampstand, the golden altar of incense, and the table of the bread of presence. Some rabbis say the menorah represented God's spiritual blessings, the bread represented God's physical blessings or material blessings to Israel, and the incense, their prayers going up to God. Then the Ark of the Covenant. Here we turn to the New Testament and the Epistle to the Hebrews that gives us this description of what was behind the second veil, the part of the tabernacle which is called the holiest of all, which had the golden censer and the Ark of the Covenant overlaid on all sides with gold, in which were the golden pot that had the manna, Aaron's rod that budded, and the tablets of the covenant. And above it were the cherubim of glory overshadowing the mercy seat. This Holy of Holies and Ark of the Covenant was the center and heart of God's presence among his people. As we said, it had the tablets of the covenant, God's law, the manna, the sign of God's providence, and Aaron's rod, the sign of the priesthood. We'll hear more about Aaron's rod when we look at the book of Numbers. How did Israel relate to God now that the tabernacle was established? We know that Moses was a prophet, and he mediated the moral precepts of truth to the people of Israel. We had the Aaronic priests now who officiated and ministered in the tabernacle, and they mediated God's life. We know that the sacrifices provided atonement that covered their sins and preserved them from judgment and death. And we also had the institution of 70 elders, and they would help Moses to guide the people and legislate the people and show the people how they were to live, namely in the way of keeping God's commandments through these judicial precepts. So we see once again a type of restoration of the ministry of prophet, communicating the truth, the ministry of priest, mediating God's life, and now the 70 elders playing a type of royal or kingly role, teaching the way of living according to God's commandments. We already mentioned that God's covenant with Israel at Mount Sinai in many ways was the completion of the new creation of Israel, that new creation that started right at the beginning of Exodus when Israel were very fruitful and multiplying. Well, the tabernacle continues this same thought and this same idea because the text of Exodus portrays the tabernacle as a microcosm or a micro-universe that in some ways echoes the completion of the creation of the world in the book of Genesis. So look at these verbal parallels between the first creation in Genesis 1 and 2 and the creation of the tabernacle in the latter chapters of the book of Exodus. At creation, God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. In Exodus 39, Moses saw the work, and behold, they had done it as the Lord had commanded it. The heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them, whereas in Exodus, all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting was finished. God finished his work of creation. Moses finished the work of building the tabernacle. So God blessed his work and the seventh day, and Moses blessed and sanctified it. You shall sanctify the tabernacle. God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, whereas at the end of the project of the building of the tabernacle, the Lord says, my Sabbaths you shall keep, that you may know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you. So clearly all these parallels are not a coincidence. The completion of the tabernacle is the completion of the new creation of Israel. That same idea continues in the portrayal of the tabernacle as a return to the Garden of Eden. And here we can see all the parallels together in one table. We saw how in the Garden of Eden there was a tree of life. In the tabernacle there is the menorah, the lampstand that kind of looks like a tree, and also the Torah or the Decalogue, which is a source of life. The Garden of Eden, we mentioned already, was guarded by cherubim, and now we find cherubim over the Ark of the Covenant. In the Garden of Eden, God walked with Adam and Eve, and God also walks in the tabernacle. That is mentioned later in the book of Deuteronomy. Adam was called to work and guard the garden, sometimes translated as to till and keep the garden. And so these two verbs, avad and shamar in Hebrew, are reflected later when we are told that the priests and Levites must work and guard the sanctuary, the same two words of avad and shamar. Both places were entered from the east, both the Garden of Eden and the tabernacle. Both places had gold in them, the gold of Havilah, and the gold, for example, of the Ark of the Covenant. Both places were highly regulated and infraction was punishable by death, both the Garden of Eden and the tabernacle. As we come near the end of our study of the book of Exodus, what are we to make of this tabernacle? Is this something that actually existed, or is it some kind of fiction? We know that the 19th century German critical biblical scholar Julius Wellhausen suggested that the tabernacle never really existed, but was a later invention of the priestly author, so-called P, who wrote after 539 BC and wanted to create a fictional justification for the later Temple of Jerusalem. Is this true? Is there any basis for that? Did the tabernacle ever exist, or is it just a later fiction? Well, we have some representations of the Egyptian camp at the Battle of Kadesh. And so this was a battle between Egypt and the Hittite Empire around 1274 BC. So just a little bit after the Exodus. If you go with the late date of the Exodus, it is right around the time of that late date. And so here we see a drawing of Pharaoh Ramses II's camp at this Battle of Kadesh between Egypt and the Hittites. Here's another illustration, and what do we notice? In the middle of the camp, we see a place of worship. We see some people bowing down towards this sanctuary where we see two angelic figures with at the center some kind of a box. And so this sanctuary, about 2/3 of it, has a holy place and a type of holy of holies with something that looks a lot like an Ark of the Covenant and two angels. What does this mean? If we compare Ramses II's camp with the tabernacle, they are very, very similar and quite different from the much later temple in Jerusalem. Both are entered from the east. There are rectangular proportions of both courtyards that are the same. Both Pharaoh's tent and the tabernacle are composed of 2 rooms. And so this seems to show that the tabernacle is not a fictitious later invention, but probably borrowed its design from Egyptian camps of the late 2nd millennium BC. In other words, the tabernacle is really well situated around the time of Ramses II because it's similar to known places of worship in Egypt at the time. So that's just a bit of a fun fact as we conclude our study of the book of Exodus. God delivered his people from slavery. He made a national covenant with them, and even after they turned away from him at the sin of the golden calf, he still renewed his covenant with them and remained with them in the tabernacle. But they still have a long way to go. Next time, we will see how God gave Israel the choice between the way of life and the way of death. We will cover the ever-popular book of Leviticus, which teaches Israel how to become holy, the book of Numbers, which tells us about Israel's journeys through the wilderness, and the book of Deuteronomy, in which Moses prepares Israel for their entrance into the Promised Land. Please remember to like this video, subscribe to our channel, click the notification bell, and post your questions and comments below. I will see you next time. Shalom and God bless.